Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Marcus and I, Elizabeth, have been married for 4 years. We were both in our early 20s and we're enjoying the sweetness of married life. We both have good jobs and are planning for the future. I've been working towards a promotion to a VP position full-time. Elizabeth worked as a seamstress in a local garment factory, and we saved all her paychecks for a down payment on a house. At the current rate of progress, we'll be able to buy our own house in about 6 months. When I get promoted, we'll be able to live on my income alone, so Elizabeth can quit her job and start our parenting program. Elizabeth has a deep love for children, and her greatest desire is to be a mother. If I hadn't insisted on securing a financial base first, I'm afraid she would have wanted kids a long time ago. While she understands that we need to reach financial stability first, I know the longing in her heart. It was a Friday in early April, and I woke up early to get ready for work. This day is critical to earning a promotion because I'm giving a presentation at 10 a.m. about our new product. All 3 teams were to participate in this demo, and it was clear that the head of the winning team would be offered the position of vice president. We have worked very hard for this. When I came out of the bathroom, Elizabeth was already awake. She said gently, "Good luck with your demo, and don't forget to come home early. I'd like to take you out to celebrate and discuss something on the side." I knew I'd be exhausted by the end of the demo, and leaving early wasn't easy. But Elizabeth has always been understanding of my early morning and late night work schedule, and has tolerated the inconveniences that come with a high-pressure job. I owe her so much and am really looking forward to a calm and cozy evening. The demo went well, and 2 of the board executives came by to congratulate me, which meant we were close to winning. When I got home at 5:30, I was in an extraordinarily happy mood. As I walked up the stairs, I saw that Elizabeth was well-dressed and ready to go out. Seeing her, I couldn't help but whistle and ask, "Where are we going?" She flashed me an irresistible smile and replied, "That new French restaurant. You've worked so hard for our future. I think you deserve a special night out." Although I preferred a simple meal like a burger and fries, since Elizabeth wanted a special night out, I was certainly willing to accommodate her. I could sense from her plans that there were going to be some romantic moments tonight, and I was full of anticipation. I went to the bathroom and straightened up my appearance and changed my clothes. I seemed to hear Elizabeth talking to someone, but I didn't pay much attention. That restaurant is just off Castle Street and has a huge parking lot. The restaurant was small, but I remember the food being quite tasty. I had dined there about a month ago for a business meeting, and now I was looking forward to a romantic evening. When we walked into the restaurant, there were only 2 pairs of customers inside. The waiter took us to a quiet corner in the back and seated us. We chatted about the demo going on and chose appetizers and entrees from the menu. When the waiter left our table, I noticed a man and woman walk into the restaurant, and they took their own seats without waiting for the waiter to lead them. The man looked somewhat familiar, but I couldn't recall where I'd seen him for a moment. He was about 40 years old, well-maintained, and exuded an air of wealth. The female companion looked much younger, in her early 20s, and the whole thing seemed out of place, too old to be his daughter, yet too young to be a companion. She had a large bag in her hand, from which she pulled out a tablet and a few other items before getting up and walking towards one of the dining pairs. She talked to the pair of guests for a few minutes, noting something on her tablet, then returned to her seat. By this time, the man was chatting with the waiter, like he was a longtime friend, but clearly had no intention of ordering. I've also noticed that Elizabeth has gotten a lot quieter and a little nervous. What was even stranger was that her cell phone was sitting on the dining room table, which violated the rule we had set at home about not looking at our phones during meals. Something was clearly not right. The girl continued to walk to the other tables, speaking for a few minutes at a time, recording something, and then continuing to walk. And the man had been sitting there with an indifferent expression, chatting with the waiter but delaying his order. As I watched my obviously preoccupied wife, the girl finally arrived at our table. "Hi, my name is Charlotte and I am a psychology and ethics student at the university. I am conducting a survey that will be part of my final thesis. Would you like to participate, please?" I looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, but my wife and I are here today for a special celebration and I don't want to be disturbed. Perhaps you could leave your phone number and we'll cooperate with your investigation some other time." Her expression became instantly confused, as if she had been assured that I wouldn't say no. and she was completely unprepared for the rejection. Elizabeth butted in suddenly. "Marcus, this girl needs our help. I'm sure we can spare a minute." This was very unlike her, as she usually hated these kinds of interruptions. I said, "Please not now, we have a lot to talk about." But she insisted, "Please go ahead and ask your questions." I sighed deeply, and then the first question came. "Have you guys seen the movie Improper Trade?" I answered no, but Elizabeth said, "We haven't seen it, but we know the plot of the movie." I really disliked the girl, and when I looked over to the table she had come from, I realized that the man had stopped talking to the waiter and was watching our table, a move he had never made with any other table. Charlotte looked at me, but I purposely avoided her gaze. She said, "Marcus, may I call you Marcus? What do you think a deal offer like this would do to a marriage?" I couldn't suppress a laugh. "It seems you don't care if I agree with you calling me Marcus, but if my wife accepts such an offer, it would mean an immediate end to our marriage." Elizabeth looked up, but Charlotte was unresponsive. She continued, "Do you think you have the right to control your wife's body by refusing such an offer?" I laughed again. "That's not the case at all. My answer made it clear that if she accepts the offer, I won't stop her. But while she's busy with her stuff, I'll be at home splitting bank accounts and packing my bags while filing divorce papers." Then Charlotte asked, "What if the offer was $2 million? Wouldn't that secure your livelihood? Would you change your mind if the agreement stipulated that you wouldn't get a dime if you divorced?" I looked her straight in the eye. The first time I had ever done so. "Charlotte, he should know me well. I make enough to live comfortably. I don't need to make money by selling my wife like a cheap sex toy. Besides, if she accepts that money, I will refuse any distribution in the divorce. Dirty money doesn't bring happiness. So no, this offer won't change my decision. Now I'm going to the restroom and cancel our order in the meantime. You have ruined my mood and I don't want to eat here anymore. Elizabeth, be ready to leave when I come back." I walked quickly to the restroom and stopped at the waiter's station and said, "Please cancel our table's order. I don't want to dine here after you let those people in and bother us." The waiter looked at me and said, "But that gentleman has promised to pay your bill as a thank you for participating in the survey." This confused me even more and I turned towards the restroom. I had a bad feeling and knew things were about to take a turn for the worse. I remember the last time I visited this restaurant. I found that I could walk around the back to the restroom and stand in an unobtrusive position. I stood there and watched my wife typing a text message on her cell phone. The man's cell phone rang, and he picked it up and began to reply. As he hit send, my wife's cell phone rang again. She picked it up to read the message, then started typing again. Then his cell phone rang again. I watched this back and forth exchange go on for several minutes, fully understanding that they were texting each other. I returned to the table and asked, "Who's this dumbass with Charlotte?" Elizabeth looked around and replied, "I don't know why I'm asking." "Oh, something's not right. He just paid for our food. I think I know him, but I can't remember where I've seen him before. And you seem to be texting with him." I say it like it's the most obvious thing in the world. Elizabeth gave a look that clearly caught her in the act and stammered. "He was just trying to be polite after she interrupted our dinner." I replied, "I'm in a bad mood and I've lost my appetite. It's time to leave." Elizabeth became anxious and suggested, "No, we can't be that rude. Just sit here and relax for a while, and let me go to the restroom first." I watched her walk away and noticed her glance at the man. Then Charlotte walked over to me, sat down, put her hand on the table near mine and said, "One last question. What number do you think is reasonable?" I smiled and put my hand on hers. She didn't jerk away. I said, "Whether she sold her body for $20 or $2 million, an adulterous woman will always be an adulterous woman. So no, any amount is irrelevant." As I said this, I began to shake her hand harder. Her hands are slim and mine are huge, so the pressure quickly became excruciating. She said, "Stop it right now." I replied, "Not until you tell me what I want to know." By this time, I was on the verge of crushing one of her fingers, and I relaxed my force a little, but didn't let go. She said, "If you don't stop, I'm going to scream." I just smile, scream. "But I bet you won't scream because there's something wrong here, and I suspect you don't want to mess with the police. And right now I'm angry enough to beat the shit out of you. Now tell me, who is he?" She tries to pull her hand back and I add more force. This time, one of her fingers snapped under the pressure and she began to cry. I continued to apply pressure, and that's when the man rushed over. I yelled, "Don't come any closer or she'll break the rest of her fingers." He stopped, and that's when Elizabeth came along. "What happened?" she asked. I smiled, blasted Elizabeth. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Charlotte, if you want to keep your pretty hands, I suggest you answer my questions now." With tears in her eyes, she replied, "William Harrison Jr." I let go of her hand. "Fuck off and never come near me again." I looked over at William Harrison Jr. and finally realized who he was. William Harrison is the owner of the factory where Elizabeth works, and this is apparently his oldest son. I've seen him at a few events, but he's nothing but a father's connections to get a management position at the factory. He had a reputation as a playboy, and rumor has it that he specialized in pursuing married women because he thought it made him appear more manly. Elizabeth came over and sat down. "William offered us $2 million if I would spend the weekend with him. I agreed because it would give us a secure life. We can buy a new house without taking out a mortgage, get our kids' college fund ready, and start preparing to have kids next week. We don't have to wait for your promotion." I stared at the tabletop in silence. "You agree?" She replied, "Yes." That's when William Harrison Jr. also took a seat at the table. He said, "I can't fulfill all your dreams for the price of borrowing your wife's time for 48 hours. The deal is simple. On Sunday night, as soon as she calls to make sure you're still home, I'll transfer $2 million into your joint account. If you leave, I'll open an account for Elizabeth that you can't touch. It's your choice." I looked at Elizabeth, but spoke to him. "You can shove your $2 million where the sun don't shine. If my wife wants to be an adulteress, I don't need her and I don't need that money. I'm leaving, and if she gets in the car, we might still be able to save the marriage. But if she doesn't, by the time she gets back, I'll have packed up and left. So, Elizabeth, it's time to make a decision." Elizabeth looked at me provocatively. "Marcus, I want kids now, not 2 years after you've worked to secure funding. This gives us a chance, and you're throwing it away." I laughed, which obviously disturbed her. "We're not going to have kids anytime soon. This little trick has completely destroyed my trust in you. And even if you leave with me now, we'll need years of counseling. But if you go with him, I won't even touch your dirty body with a decontaminated long pole." I purposely used that expression, knowing that she hates it. She had a wonderful expression on her face, and spittle flew out of her mouth as she spoke. "I hate this. How can you degrade my honor with such words?" I stood up, letting my napkin fall on the food I had just served. "This couldn't be more appropriate as it perfectly describes how I feel about this little setup and how I feel about you right now. I'm leaving, Elizabeth. It's time to make a decision." I headed for the exit and the dumbass tried to stand up, but when I put my hand on his forehead to push him back into his seat, he lost his balance and fell backward. As I continued to walk, a waiter stepped in front of me, but I held up my hand to signal him to get out of the way, and he silently stepped aside. As the door closed behind me, I heard Elizabeth calling my name. I walked quickly to the car, opened the door, and got in. I took a few deep breaths to let the tension in my body subside and started the engine. I drove slowly through the restaurant, and Elizabeth was still standing there. I sped up and drove home. I took a suitcase off the shelf in the closet and began to mechanically pack my things. Within an hour, I had packed all my clothes and necessities into several suitcases and black garbage bags. That's when the phone rang, and it was Elizabeth. "Honey, are you okay? I'm sorry things turned out this way, but this opportunity was too good to pass up. I'm going to shut down now, so I'll see you Sunday night around 7. I stayed silent and just held the phone to my ear. The silence obviously pained her, but I was numb to it. She really wants to do this and thinks it's for our own good. Then she said, "Look, we can talk about it when we get back on Sunday. I want to have a baby as soon as possible, and this money will ensure its future." I simply asked, "Who is the father of that child?" She froze, but replied, "Of course you are. Not in this lifetime." I hung up after that. I loaded all my personal belongings into the car. I logged on to online banking, went to my home savings account, and took out half of the money. I then visited an online divorce service website, filled out the paperwork, paid the fee, and arranged for it to be delivered to Elizabeth at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Just as I was leaving the house for the last time, A car pulled up and Elizabeth jumped out, yelling, "Stop, Marcus! Wait, it's just a prank, a belated April Fool's joke." The driver, who was also an asshole, got out of the car and said, "It was a joke. We thought you were going back to the restaurant. We waited there for 2 hours, and then Elizabeth got your divorce notice, so we rushed over." I looked at Elizabeth in silence. If it was a joke, it was bad enough to do irreparable damage to our marriage. I need to get away for a few days to think about it. With those words, I got in the car. As I started the engine, I heard her shout, "Please withdraw the divorce papers by Saturday." By Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at my brother's house with him and his wife Sophia. Sophia and Elizabeth spoke on the phone a few hours ago, and she came back to tell us about the conversation. "Marcus," she began, "I don't think it's a joke, but I also don't believe it's a genuine desire to have sex with another man. She's so desperate to have kids, she's willing to do anything. On the other hand, she didn't really intend to. Her idea was for you to say that you have enough money to take care of her so she could say that since we have enough money, we don't have to wait." He's a friend of hers from the factory, but trust me, he's not at all interested in having sex with Elizabeth. In fact, he probably prefers you. But now she realizes she's created a situation where you've lost all trust. She thinks that if you have children, all that love and trust will come back. The question is, can you do that? That's a hard question to answer. Ever since Elizabeth's best friend got pregnant 6 months ago, she's been asking me when I'm going to have kids. The thing is, the whole procrastination thing makes me very unsure, and I definitely don't want to raise a child in a dysfunctional home. I got up from the dining room table and went to bed at 4 p.m., hoping to have time to think. By Sunday, I still hadn't gotten my thoughts straight. My real problem was those 2 hours. If this is really a setup, a joke, or an attempt to emphasize the point of having a child, she should have gone home immediately. The fact that she didn't suggest that there are some things that need to be discussed between her and William. I also don't believe them when they say things like William prefers men. I decided to let the divorce papers go forward, and whatever happens, happens. A month later, with William's help, Elizabeth found an attorney and the court ordered us to have 12 counseling sessions over 4 weeks, 3 times a week. We sat in front of the counselor, and this young woman looked at me the way my first grade teacher looked at me when I couldn't memorize the alphabet. Elizabeth eagerly explains her plan and how it was devised by William. Ironically, Charlotte is indeed a psychology student writing a paper on how men cope with stressful situations. I should be her key case. When Elizabeth finished, the counselor looked at me and said, almost through clenched teeth, "Well, Marcus, you've heard the whole story, so why do you insist on a divorce when your wife wants you and needs you?" Aha, I thought to myself, Marcus is going to get hit 3 times a week for the next 4 weeks. I looked the counselor in the eye and said, "Do you really believe this?" Because I don't believe it. There was a 2-hour gap in her story. From the time I left the restaurant until she got home, that was enough time to get a room and get laid and come back. She never explained those 2 hours, never provided any evidence of what happened in those 2 hours. But you only talk about the setup part, and that's the real story of that night. The counselor was angry. "You need to get over this, and then you and your wife can rebuild your marriage." I stood up and said, "Your job is to determine if our marriage can be saved, not to convince me to stay in a marriage that I want to end. If she can't prove to me that nothing happened in those 2 hours, I'm out of here." The counselor reported to the judge that I was refusing to cooperate, and 2 days later I found myself back in court. The judge looked me up and down as if examining something scraped off the bottom of his shoe. "Why do you refuse to cooperate with the counselor?" I replied, "Maybe you should listen to the recording of the first session." The counselor said I should forget about Elizabeth's wrongdoing. "Your Honor, it is not the counselor's job to lecture me. I need to know the truth about that night, but my wife and the counselor are trying to hide it. If they refuse to answer my questions, I won't be able to honor their request that I forgive my wife because I don't know exactly what she did." The judge thought for a moment, then asked, "What do you want to know?" I quickly replied, "It's simple. There's a 2-hour gap in her timeline, and she refuses to talk about that time. I want to know what happened during that time. My wife refuses to talk about it, and the counselor says I don't need to know. I'm here today because the counselor wants you to order me to stop asking this question, claiming that I'm refusing to cooperate in this way." The judge rubbed his chin. looking like a 1920s movie star, then said, "You have a right to know. Please sit down. I'd like to call the counselor to testify." Elizabeth's attorney and counselor, who was present, stood up and said, "Your Honor, she's not involved in this case. She has her own role to play, and she's just trying to get Mr. Marcus to stop obstructing the process. Calling her to testify will not help that." The judge was clearly angered by this statement. This case was brought by your client and her counselor claiming that Mr. Marcus was refusing to cooperate. As I see it, it is Mrs. Samuels who is refusing to cooperate and the counselor who is harboring her. Either she testifies or I will stop the counseling sessions and grant the divorce, your choice. The attorney and the counselor argued heatedly, but finally the counselor reluctantly stood up and walked to the witness stand. After she was sworn in, the judge asked, "Do you know what happened in those 2 hours?" The counselor was silent until the judge said, "Ma'am, I remind you that you are testifying under oath and must answer this question." She said softly, so quietly I could barely hear her, "Yes, I know." The judge tapped his fingers on the table and waited for her to start talking. When she didn't speak, he said, "Please tell the court what happened, and speak louder this time." Mrs. Samuels and Mr. Harrison go to a nearby bar to discuss what happened and how to deal with the aftermath. Mrs. Samuels believes that Mr. Harrison's offer to her and Marcus is the fastest way to achieve the large family she has always dreamed of. She thought Mr. Samuels would come back to her, but when she received the divorce notice, she panicked and realized she shouldn't have put the offer on the table to see if Mr. Samuels would accept it. Now she realizes it was a mistake and wants to forget about it and move on. As Mrs. Samuels' assigned counselor, my role is to help Mr. Samuels understand that it's just an offer, and if he refuses, she'll forget about it. The judge laughed. "Do you understand what you are saying? You were assigned to Mrs. Samuels, not to force Mr. Samuels to comply with her demands. You were assigned by the court to determine if their marriage was salvageable." At this point, the counselor interrupts and says, "But if he can get over the offer and admit it was rejected, the marriage can be saved." The judge looked at her through his glasses and said, "Counselor, I am terminating these talks because you are not acting independently. Mr. Samuels," he said to me, "what do you want from this hearing?" My attorney looked at me, then stood up and said, "My client wants the divorce proceedings to continue." Elizabeth's attorney almost jumped out of his seat. "Your Honor, you cannot terminate the hearing on this basis. The hearing must continue, and my client wants this marriage to continue." The judge looked at him and said, "If you had acted fairly, I would have done so. But you have turned the counseling sessions into a farce by trying to hide important information from Mr. Samuels. I will not tolerate such behavior. I am granting the divorce." An hour later, I came home to find Elizabeth sitting on the porch crying. "Why, Marcus, I just want a big family, and this is just a means to an end." I took her hand into the room. "You set me up, lied to me, played me for a fool. You knew that offer was unacceptable, and yet you still wanted to carry it out. I could never be with a woman who did something like that." She kept crying, "But I want to be with you. I want to have 4 children with you, and I want us to never need anything." I just shook my head. "Go get your $2 million and find someone else to give you those babies. As for me, I could never be with a woman who thinks that's acceptable. Goodbye, Elizabeth." I opened the door and walked into a new world. Whether the world will be a better place, who knows? That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.